Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Mira Nair's 34-year-old son has become the first Muslim, the first Indian, the first South Asian, and the youngest mayor of New York since 1892. How momentous is this achievement? How did Zohran Mamdani create this victory? What explains his incredible appeal to New Yorkers? What sort of mayor is he likely to be? What does this mean for his Democratic Party? And equally importantly, what does it mean for President Trump's Republicans? Those are the key issues I shall raise today with the US national editor and chief commentator of the Financial Times, Edward Luce. Mr. Luce joins us live from Washington, D.C. Edward Luce, as I said, Zohran Mamdani has become the first Muslim, the first Indian, the first South Asian, and at 34, the youngest mayor of New York since 1892. How momentous an achievement is this?
It's extraordinary. I mean, nobody had heard of him in January. They'd heard of Mira Nair. I mean, the sort of more esoteric cinema goers had heard of his mother, but he was not a known name even in New York a few months ago. Now he's sort of one of the 2 or 3 best known political names in America around the world because it's an extraordinary victory. The turnout was bigger than at any time in my lifetime in New York. It was more than double what it was the last time New York had a mayoral election. And so he managed to do that rare thing. He captured lightning in a bottle.
You know, as you said, 6 months ago, no one had heard of Zohran Mamdani, and yet he ended up with more than 50% of the popular vote. How much of this is because of his personality, because of his capacity to grab voters' attention, and also, I suppose, his mastery of social media?
Well, all of the above. I mean, he is. His age is a plus factor. The Democratic Party is gerontocratic. There's a lot of time-serving old men running the party, including the Democrat or ex-Democrat that he trounced on Tuesday, Andrew Cuomo. Chuck Schumer, who's the Senate minority leader, the Democratic leader in the Senate, he's a New York senator as well. He's coming up towards, well, I think he's his mid-70s. Many of his colleagues on the House, are in their early 80s. This is an aging and tired and defeated brand. So having somebody young, bold, who says things that those party elders don't say about Israel, for example, but who is as fluent with social media and conversationally, just sort of on these live, non-staged, non-performative, non-scripted, continuous conversation he managed to set up with the electorate. That was something very, very new and very fresh. But I don't think we should underestimate his real, very strong stance against inequality. New York, is a city of plutocrats. It's a very expensive city for everybody else, and it was everybody else who voted for him.
As you said, there were two sections of the New York voters that Mamdani strongly appealed to. One was the working class, the other was the young. Do you believe, as I think you were saying, that his economic agenda, basically promising free bus rides, a rent freeze, free childcare, and government-run grocery stores, that this ensured massive working class support?
It did. I mean, I think the core one to that is affordability, housing affordability in particular, in New York, and that spoke to pretty much everybody, even to younger Jewish New Yorkers. Roughly a third of Jewish New Yorkers voted for him, which is pretty extraordinary, given the degree to which he was presented as a pro-Hamas terrorist supporting figure. In fact, one of the ads in the city showed Mamdani with the backdrop of the collapsing Twin Towers behind him, with the implication that this is a jihadi Mamdani, and if he gets in, then we're going to get events like this again. The fact that Jewish New Yorkers, particularly younger ones, voted for him, I think shows. I don't think it was because of that. But perhaps it was in spite of it. Some agree with him, so it's a bit more complicated, but it shows just the deep resonance of this unaffordability crisis of cost of living theme that echoes with voters everywhere, but particularly in New York.
You mentioned the critical importance of affordability in his appeal to New Yorkers. And CNN yesterday reported they did a survey that 56% of New Yorkers have said that the most important factor as far as they are concerned is cost of living. How come other Democrats didn't think of the same thing? Why is this man so unique in having identified what now looks the obvious thing to identify?
Well, I mean, to be fair, there were other elections on Tuesday. There was the governorship of and the Assembly of Virginia settled, and New Jersey as well. There were some other elections. This was an off year, as in an odd numbered year. So they weren't nationwide, but the elections that were held, you saw equally thumping Democratic victories from people. Abigail Spanberger, for example, the new governor, the first female governor of Virginia, for example. She focused pretty relentlessly on the cost of living too. Now, her remedies are less radical than Mamdani's. She's not proposing a rent freeze. She's not proposing state-run and state-owned grocery stores. I'm not sure she was proposing free childcare help, but she focused relentlessly on the same issue and won by a 15 percentage point margin, which is big. Ditto for Mikey Sherrill. She won the governorship of New Jersey, the second female governor there. Again, relentless focus on the cost of living. And again, fairly young and fresh faces, but coming from different parts of the Democratic Party. I think what they all had in common was they were skillfully able to exploit local conditions to reap the national anti-Trump feeling.
Now, young New Yorkers gave Mamdani a level of support they haven't given a politician for a very long time. How do you explain that? And to what extent is it because they saw Mamdani as a symbol of change and maybe a symbol of optimism and hope?
Certainly a symbol of change. No doubt about that. The degree to which people have been turned off by politics and become cynical, particularly younger people, it cannot be overstated just how alienated younger Americans are from normal politics and from normal media and from all the ways we used to do things, or when people our age still do things. The degree of rejection is strong. And Mamdani is the personification of that, because he didn't play by those old rules. I mean, what he said, whether you agree with it or not, what he said about Israel and the IDF and what's happening in Gaza and war crimes and how he would arrest Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, under the ICC, the International Criminal Court warrant. if he turned up in New York. Now, he doesn't have the power as mayor of New York to arrest Netanyahu, but that kind of thing isn't what Democrats, let alone Republicans, say. And yet there is a sort of massive share of, particularly, as I say, the younger Americans who feel deeply strongly that issue just isn't being, they're not being represented on Israel and what they feel about the perceived injustices and war crimes and even genocide that they think is going on, they see going on. And Mamdani comes along and he says, I see the same thing. This is what's happening. I'm going to arrest that country's prime minister. Well, that's a different kind of politics. And that initially was what got him noticed. But I wouldn't want to underplay, you know, the pledge to tax billionaires, the war on plutocrats. This is popular too. Inequality is extreme in America, and there's a stock market boom going on because of the AI gold rush. But most Americans are not feeling that. It adds to the growth numbers, but the growth numbers are just going to that sector, and it flatters everybody else who aren't seeing any of it. And in fact, who are feeling themselves priced, particularly in a city like New York, feeling themselves further priced out of affordability because of it. So to get somebody coming along and slaughtering those two holy cows, you know, the inequality one and the Israel one, that's a new kind of politics.
So how much credit do you give Zohran Mamdani for having picked up issues that strike a real resonant chord with America, with New York voters? Affordability, inequality, Israel, taxing the rich to pay for those who are not rich. How much credit does he get for putting his finger on these issues that really resonated with people?
Oh, he gets a lot of credit. You know, they say, I think it's a New York phrase actually, that you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. You know, so now the governing begins, and that's going to be a bigger challenge. I mean, this is an extraordinarily effective and very skillful campaign, and he's got an attractive personality. I mean, he engages with his critics, you know, but he doesn't back down. But he can back off, but not back down. He's quite skilled, but governing is a different skill. And some of his promises are simply unaffordable, ironically, since this is about the affordability crisis. And he doesn't have the ability to tax the super rich, the billionaires, without the cooperation of the governor of New York and the New York Assembly up in upstate New York, in Albany. There'll be big questions about whether a rent freeze is going to make things worse, because so many landlords will take their apartments, their flats off the market, and that will push up the cost of the remaining dwindled supply. So, I mean, he's going to have, if he's going to do well, he's going to have to show a learning curve. But if he doesn't show a learning curve, he could run New York into the sand very, very quickly.
That, in a sense, is the biggest challenge he faces, because he has, at the age of 34, no experience, I would say almost none at all, of governance and government. And yet he will be presiding over 300,000 employees as mayor of New York and handling a budget of $115 billion. Does his experience, or lack of experience rather, forgive me, become a handicap?
Well, you'd have thought so. I mean, probably the most effective mayor New York's had in the last generation or so is Michael Bloomberg. Really the opposite of Mamdani, a billionaire, lacking in any real retail charisma or political sort of skills at the people level, but highly experienced, technocratically very accomplished. And he reformed the police. I mean, the police is one area where the New York mayor does have a lot of power. Housing is another. Bloomberg sort of put in a lot of changes, didn't get huge credit for it, but New York looked and felt good in those days, which isn't that long ago, but it feels like a long time ago. Mamdani will need to reach out to people like that to get their help. If he gets into a sort of permanent war with the governor of New York and New York's sort of bigwigs, and its billionaires, he's going to find that diverts him and blocks him. So he's going to have to show a sort of a willingness to be co-opted in order himself to do some co-opting. But that's politics. And if, I don't discount somebody at 34 being able to do that. I suspect he's probably much better able to whip together public support and coalitions than, say, Andrew Cuomo would ever have been. And he's double, well, not quite double Mamdani's age. So this isn't just about age and experience. It's also about skill. Politics is really, it's a human contact sport. And it's about persuading people and being trusted by people and then getting them to do things or meet you halfway. This is hard to measure now from 2 days after his whopping victory. It's hard to measure how good he'll be at that. But I wouldn't discount his adaptability and intelligence.
Normally, Ed Luce, I would imagine a candidate's lack of experience would be held against him. It would put people off. It would worry them. In this particular instance, to what extent was he helped by a point made by the Financial Times in the profile they did on him on Tuesday? The fact that the two main Democratic contenders at the primary stage that he had to compete with were disgraced politicians, Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo. Did that help him ensure that he would sweep the Democratic primary, which he did, and give him a huge momentum thereafter?
For sure it did. I mean, politics is, pretty much the only profession I know where experience counts against you. There's a reason why Donald Trump is president from nowhere, at least in 2016 from nowhere, with zero governing experience. It's a measure of voter frustration and dissatisfaction with business as usual. So, I mean, in America in particular, experience is not a plus factor in politics. And in that respect, Mamdani isn't bucking any big trends here. He's actually picking up a time-honored American tradition, which is an anti-politics politics. And so in a way, he's sort of reaping with different methods and in a different way the same sort of dialectic as Donald Trump did and has again. And I think, those on the MAGA right, they see in Mamdani a genuinely potent threat. I guess, the fact that he was not born in the United States means his ambitions, they don't have to stop at being mayor. He could, run for the Senate, I guess, but he cannot, he'd be too young, by the way, to run for the Senate. You have to be 35. But he cannot run for the presidency.
But there's a very interesting sense in which he benefited, just as Trump benefited, from not having experience, from being an outsider from conventional politics, and being pretty radical in his thinking. Both had those qualities and both benefited from them.
Absolutely.
Tell me, he's a strong advocate of Palestinian rights, as you were saying yourself a moment ago. And as you said, he's vowed to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if the Israeli prime minister visits New York. As a result, Donald Trump has called him a Jew hater. How have New York's Jewish population, which I gather is the largest Jewish population outside Israel, responded to Mamdani's victory? Are they full of apprehension and fear? Or do they take comfort from the fact that 1/3 of New York's Jewish population voted for Mamdani?
I mean, it's the second largest Jewish city in the world. And they voted, I mean, that's a large share, a non-trivial share of the Jewish New Yorker population voted for him. That's quite a moment. I think it's wrong to generalize about Jewish American opinion. I mean, two-thirds of Jewish Americans or more disapprove of Netanyahu and consider him to be making their lives less secure, and Israel's future security less secure by turning Israel into something of a pariah. So some will actually agree with Mamdani's views. His views are anti-Zionist. And I think it's on the right of Jewish opinion, and there are lots of Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods in New York, none of which voted for him. It was less than 10% of those neighborhoods voted for him. They see him as an anti-Semite. I mean, I would argue that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, but I can concede sometimes it might sort of bleed into that. So there are radically different views on Mamdani, and it would be impossible really to summarize what Jewish opinion is. But there's been a lot of apocalyptic warnings about him. I mean, Trump can't decide whether Mamdani is Hamas or a communist, because these are two very different things. But he's sort of both in Trump's head and in Fox News's head. So we will see. I think he's going to be used as the foil. They're going to try and sort of pin Mamdani on the Democratic Party. This is who you are now. And I don't know, it didn't work on Tuesday. And it didn't work against other Democrats in sort of the similar kinds of tactics on Tuesday either. The real lesson from this week is if you stick to your knitting, which is the sort of basic politics. What was it Trump was elected on? Cost of living, promising to reduce inflation. What's happened since then? Well, quite the opposite. If you stick to that, then you'll get somewhere. I interviewed Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker, Democratic, the other day, and she kept emphasizing democracy is saved at the kitchen table. And I think Tuesday was a big demonstration effect of that.
Well, tell me, how have the wealthy in New York responded to Mamdani's victory? I remember reading in the papers that billionaires like Bill Ackman spent a lot of money trying to ensure that Mamdani was defeated and not elected. And I know that Mamdani earlier in the campaign has been talking about a 2% tax on incomes over 1 million, which would threaten a lot of very wealthy people in New York, some 400,000 or 500,000, I gather. So how have they responded to his victory? And is there a danger that rich money might flee New York?
Rich money has been fleeing New York to some degree. There's been a sort of migration of a lot of New Yorkers south to Florida, which is, MAGA central, Palm Beach, etc. That started in COVID or picked up in COVID. Maybe that will continue. Bill Ackman, who was outspoken in terms of blowing the whistle, he's a prominent Jewish New Yorker, billionaire. He actually sounded quite conciliatory on Wednesday and said, look, if you need my help as mayor of New York, I'm here, let's talk, that kind of thing. I think you're probably going to get that because people are pragmatic. They didn't want him to be elected, but he has been elected. Andrew Cuomo threatened, I think it was jokingly, but it wasn't reported that way, to move to Florida if Mamdani won. And that was a big incentive for a lot of New Yorkers to vote for Mamdani.
Let me at this point widen our discussion before we end. What impact will Zohran Mamdani's campaign style, his economic platform, and I dare say his personality have on the Democratic Party? Will it reinvigorate the party, suggesting a path back to victory when Trump's term ends? Or has he badly divided it over whether he's been the right person or not?
Hard to prognosticate. What I will say is the last year, precisely, in fact, because it was exactly a year ago that on November the 6th that Trump was reelected, the Democrats have been in a form of sort of depression, a sense of fatalism that whatever they do, this man is dominating, and there's no real guardrails against him, and we as a brand are exhausted and defeated, and we have no new ideas. And all of a sudden there's electricity in the air again. This is, there's nothing like a little demonstration effect to change the mood. So I think even though we should for sure not overinterpret a clutch of off-year election results like this, which tend to go against the incumbent White House party. And we do tend to see these elections as referendums and presidential elections as choices. So very different kinds of election with very different kinds of electorates. In spite of all of that, this is a pretty dramatic demonstration effect, and I think it will galvanize Democrats. It will, for one thing is for sure, whatever happens in next year's midterm elections, this is a good sign for Democrats, assuming those elections are free and fair. Whatever happens in next year's midterms, there's going to be a very crowded presidential field thereafter, 18 months or so from now. There's going to be a really crowded Democratic primary.
My very last question, Luce. What do you believe will be the impact Mamdani has on Trump's Republicans? I noticed that the Financial Times, in the profile they did of Mamdani on Tuesday, say many Republicans are rubbing their hands in glee. They plan to use Mamdani as the new bogeyman. And Trump has clearly threatened that if Mamdani wins, he will dramatically cut federal funding for New York. Do you see both of those materializing?
He already did cut a lot of funding for New York, funding for big infrastructure, for a tunnel under the Hudson, for example. And I think New York's response was there on Tuesday. I mean, it was quite clear who's to blame for cutting that funding. It wasn't New York that asked for the funding to be cut. So Trump is going to have to play this a little bit more carefully. He has been punishing Democratic states, but not Republican states. It's such a sort of transparent maneuver. I'm not sure that doesn't boomerang on him. On the other hand, you know, Mamdani could slip up. He probably will slip up, and they'll be watching him. They want to pin the party to Mamdani. I think Mamdani is going to be aware of that, and he doesn't want to give the material.
Luce, thank you very much for the time you've given me. Thank you very much for sharing your understanding and analysis of how and why Mamdani won and what impact he would have on both New York as well as American politics. I'm deeply grateful. Take care. Stay safe.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on The Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.